Greetings again. Here we are in our virtual classroom. This first introductory lecture is actually just a chance for me to get some worries off my chest. Worries about the content of this class. Worries about applied ethics or worries about applying ethics. By the way, I should just say, the only background reading that you need to do for this lecture would be to just go through the course description on the syllabus. There's one from the catalog, and then there's the more expanded bit that I provided. That should provide you with enough background for what I'm about to talk about. So as I say, I have worries about applying ethics. The typical model, I think, for a moral philosopher is to take some sort of analysis of moral concepts, to sit down and to think really hard about what would be the best thing, what would be truly good and truly right, and then to say, I've got it. And then they take their account, they take their theory, and they go around applying it. And they render judgments in their applying it. They say that that's wrong, and this is, yes, right, and this is permissible, and this is punishable. Sometimes these theories get applied in such a way that policies spring from theory, that you apply the theory by saying that there should be a rule that prohibits people from doing this wrong thing, or there should be policies that encourage people to do right things. Right? And I have worries about this, and I'm going to try to talk a little bit about what they are. As I say, they all have to do with applying ethics. Applied ethics is a branch of moral philosophy where you take a moral theory and you see what practical implications that theory has for real-world topics. Here are some examples. There are bioethical questions, medical ethical questions, questions about environmental ethics, about the appropriate use of natural resources. There are questions in animal ethics about the use of animals for various ends that human beings have, like food or medical research. There are topics in business ethics, political ethics, sexual ethics, population ethics. All of these have to do with problems or controversies. So for example, these can just be from a list from the syllabus. Topics on abortion, euthanasia, vegetarianism, prostitution, and others, immigration, the place of religion in politics, the recreational use of drugs, and so on. So these are all applied ethical issues, and that's essentially what we're occupied with this semester. So why study applied ethics, right? Why specifically tackle some of these controversies from a moral perspective? Why should you look to a philosopher or philosophers to have anything interesting to say about these things, about this range of applied topics? Well, on the one hand, the answer seems kind of obvious, right? Philosophers are supposed to have a kind of comparative advantage in arguing about controversial matters and in analyzing complex problems. And when it comes down to moral philosophy, ethics is inherently practical. Right? You apply ethics to reach a decision about whether something is something that should be done or something is something that should not be done. Right? Other things that we can do is help clarify matters that are matters of public debate in our society. Right? So the basic idea is that ethics, the topic of ethics, is what ought to be done. And all of the policy issues all of the social issues that we'll be talking about are questions about what ought to be done and what ought not to be done. So again, it seems pretty clear. But like I said at the beginning of this, I have some worries about this enterprise. And my main worry springs from how I see philosophy, what I see philosophy as being. Right? So what is it? Well, how do I see it? Specifically, what's involved in doing philosophy well? And the answer is, philosophers want to get things right. Right? We are lovers of wisdom, philosophy. Right? We pursue the truth. Perhaps a better way to think about this, we attempt to present really, really good reasons for thinking that someone has gotten things right. Right? Now, the question that comes immediately to mind, presenting good reasons for thinking that one has got things right, how good do these reasons have to be? And again, the way I see philosophy is that the bar has got to be pretty high. They have to be really good reasons to count as really good philosophical analysis. So maybe that suggests that the reasons have to be good enough, persuasive enough to demand acceptance from any rational person. That the arguments are so good, so precise, that any reasonable person should just agree with your conclusion if you've offered a very good philosophical argument. Now that's really hard to do, right? It might not even be a very nice way of treating people, sort of haranguing them with arguments until they agree with you. But the bigger problem is that this is a really high bar. This is really difficult to do. But I think it's important so as to avoid someone believing something just because they want to. You have to have really good arguments for your positions in order to avoid accepting a conclusion to an argument just because it coincides with something that you already agree with. Right? That's a sort of cheat. That means that it's possible that the arguments aren't very good, and you just agree with the conclusion because it aligned with something that you already thought. Right? Philosophy shouldn't be like that. Philosophy isn't supposed to be a game where different sides choose their favorite argument. Right? Because, again, if you're doing this right, what you want to believe isn't relevant. Philosophy is supposed to avoid ideological advocacy, right? Instead, again, it's supposed to get things right. But again, my worry springs from this, right? This is really hard to do, especially in the kind of controversial applied topics that we'll be talking about this semester. So the question to ask about the enterprise of this semester is, does applied ethics measure up? Does applied ethics, or do applied ethicists give arguments that get people to believe their conclusion because this is the only rational conclusion to reach? And I'm afraid the answer is not usually. Usually not. Now, why not? What's the reason that this is such a high bar, especially for moral philosophers to reach with respect to these applied controversial topics? I've sort of answered the question. These topics are very controversial. Right? People, as I put it here, people disagree. There are just too many areas in this neighborhood of applied ethics that's characterized by reasonable disagreements. That is, where you have people very conscientiously, very carefully thinking about what the best thing to do is. And they deliberate in the same way that other people deliberate, but many of these people doing the same thing, engaged in the same rational inquiry procedure, they reach different conclusions. They disagree. So when we apply ethics, right, we seek to determine how our moral principles concerning freedom, or concerning respect for life, or concerning whether or not somebody should be allowed to ingest a particular substance in their bodies, or whether or not people should be allowed to live and to work wherever they want to in the world, there might not be any argument about these questions that are so persuasive, that are so powerful, that they demand acceptance by all rational beings. And if that's right, then the arguments have sort of, at least with respect to this really high bar, these arguments fail. I mean, there are reasoned positions, there are good arguments, and there are bad arguments, but even among the good arguments, there are a lot of reasoned positions that end up endorsing contradictory beliefs. People of good faith, people thinking about the matter as carefully as they can, as conscientiously as they can, will very often disagree with each other about what to do, about what kind of rules in our society we should have. So a big question for us is, what do we do about reasonable disagreement? Right? Well, if we can't mount arguments that can be relied upon to convince any rational person, then what are we doing? Well, one thing that we could be doing is just engaging in rational, reasoned discussion with people who disagree with us. This is really important in a free society, in a society like ours. We can rationally discuss matters about which we disagree with each other, right? I mean, we can discuss things like, things in the news, things like whether the UK would be better off joining their euro area or keeping the pound as as their currency. That's a matter of reasonable disagreement and discussion. People I've seen on the news channels have different ideas about this, and they offer this argument. And on the other side, they have arguments that's supposed to contradict those arguments, and they offer their own conclusions for thinking differently, right? And they end up sort of being nice with each other. Sometimes they yell a little bit, but usually they do this in a reasoned, rational way. But people can present these reasons for and against, but how persuasive their arguments are going to end up depending to a large extent on people's values, their ends, their aims that they have, right? This makes these discussions kind of ideological. And the thing about ideological discussions is you don't get a unified convergence upon one right answer. So the kind of reasoned, rational discussion that characterizes really good news shows, I mean, we can do that, and we'll probably spend some time doing that, but philosophers aren't the only people that do that. Good journalists do it. Ordinary people do it at dinner parties. So I'm not sure that counts, though, as doing philosophy. Remember, philosophy means hitting a kind of really high bar, getting things right, pursuing truth, right? So there could be these other important aims, but I'm not sure that it means that we're doing philosophy. So here are some of these other aims. One thing we could do, besides just presenting our reasoned and rational ideas, this discussion can help clarify what the different arguments are in a given sort of problematic controversy or neighborhood, the problems that they encounter, the typical objections that different sides to an issue meet, right? This is important. So one of the things that moral philosophers can bring to this that maybe even decent journalism can't is that we can clarify in a kind of analytical way whether or not the arguments confront certain basic problems and how they could sort of strengthen their position to deal with those problems. And I mean, I might as well throw it. So it's a kind of applied critical thinking. This is important. But again, it's maybe not what you thought you were going to be doing. If you thought you were signing up this class to come up with the correct philosophical consensus about these applied issues, then you might not get that. You might not get that. Now, I don't want to throw out all hope, because sometimes there could be genuinely philosophical argument that has direct, applied, practical implications. Right? That's possible, right? But usually the issues are exceedingly complex, and the reasons, very, very plausible reasons, are pointing in very different directions about the right policy, about the right rule, about what's right or wrong to do. So I just want to conclude this by just offering some advice. Think of it as sort of applied ethics chastened, right? Applied ethics without pretense, right? What we need to do is watch out for the pretense of applied ethics. When you read the reading assignments, they're going to have a point of view. They're going to have a conclusion that they want to convince you of, right? They are applying a theory of morality to a practical issue. You should be skeptical of this. As you read the assignments, as you listen to me lecture about a topic, right? You need to watch out for this pretense. Be careful, I say here. Be careful that we don't mask private advocacy of my sort of favorite ideological position. Don't confuse that with philosophy. Make sure that we stick to this very high bar about what philosophy is. The danger when sophisticated, rational, ideological advocacy is conducted as if it were philosophy. The danger of that is that it gives the impression that philosophy is merely some kind of intellectual game where people just defend what they want to believe. That's a terrible disservice to philosophy. And I love philosophy. And so let's all be very careful when we do this. So again, take a look at the description of the course topics, the course catalog description, and my more expanded version of the description. And then I'm going to invite you to a discussion forum that I'll set up that asks you to sort of reflect on this sort of opening statement that I've made about the danger of applied philosophy.